Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gabesty here. This is the Heroic Raid Guide for Shaw Pride, the 4th boss in Siege of Orgrimmar. And as always, you can click on the annotations at the bottom to check out any of the other guides, or look in the description for the table of contents to skip around on the video. So let's get started. Now for raid composition, you'll want 2 tanks and 2 to 3 healers, as always very standard decisions. However, in the case of Heroic Shaw Pride, it's important to consider why you would bring 2 or 3 healers and what gains or detriments you might see. So, in the case of this fight, believe it or not, on Heroic Shaw Pride, this is one of the lowest healing per second requirements that we've seen in this entire zone, and this includes many normal fights. There are numerous normal difficulty encounters that have a much higher healing per second requirement than this fight does on Heroic. At the end of our fight, you can check the logs in our description if you want to see the details. It's always linked there. But suffice to say, at the end of this encounter, over 10 minutes of fighting, the average healing per second for the entire fight was about 250,000, which is an extremely low number, especially for heroic content. So, needless to say, if you're just basing your healer composition on the healing requirement for the fight, I would strongly recommend 2 healers. There's really no need for a 3rd healer because there just is not enough constant or frequent raid damage to warrant that. However, there's another big consideration for healing, and that is the dispel requirements. We'll talk about that in that section because it doesn't really belong in this composition section, but just keep that in mind as you watch the rest of this guide, that your healer composition should be mostly based on your management of dispels and not so much the need for the healing that it provides. Now, the first mechanic change or addition on Heroic is a new ability called Rifts of Corruption. These are little bolts that are shot out by the Shaw Pride pretty frequently during the fight, and they will land at a random location around the room. There you can see me running toward a rift right now. These rifts will just form up where they land, and while they're active, they will constantly shoot bolts at random raid members. These bolts will hit the location that the player was standing when they fired, and once they impact that location, any player that's standing there at the time, within a very short radius, like 2 yards, will take some damage, but also, more importantly, gain 5 pride as well. So, you can see the rifts, there's one on the top right, 2 in the top right now, 1 in the bottom right, and so on. These are a very constant, frequent occurrence. And more often than not, your raid needs to be spread and dodging these bolt attacks since they only land after they traveled to their target location. So most of the time, if not all the time, players can actually dodge these attacks. However, you do need to manage these rifts because they'll quickly overwhelm you if you do not handle them properly. So for Heroic, management of the rifts is probably the most important thing you can do to increase your likelihood of success on this Heroic version. There are still all the normal mechanics, and there's another Heroic mechanic which we'll talk about in just a moment, but overall, management of rifts is the key thing to focus on. Once you get a good method down for that and people get used to the mechanic and all that stuff, the timing, things will start to come together pretty quickly, because the rest is mostly just stuff you've done in normal before. Now, the rifts make this difficult for a few reasons. The most important reason is that their spawn location, as mentioned before, is random. And this is a pretty big room. So, if you're on one side of it against one wall, for example, and someone opposite you on the other wall, that's probably 100 yards or so. It's a really long distance. And even worse if you're corner to corner. Because of that, you'll often find range issues, dispel, heal issues, all that good stuff come up when players are moving around to handle rifts. So you really need a good overall position or, raid plan to alleviate these potential issues as much as possible. You still have to handle rifts, and that means moving out to get them, but by positioning a little bit better, you can kind of prevent some of these potential issues from cropping up. So for our group, we found what worked best for managing positions was to come up with sort of default raid positions. These would be the positions that raid members would stand in when they're not doing anything else in the fight. They're just doing their normal healing or DPS on the boss. Now, this does not happen all that frequently, but when it does, it's important that those players have some place to call home effectively, some location around the boss that they can stand and know that they're safe from other players' mechanics, because that becomes really important as the fight progresses. So if you look around the room, you can kind of make out 4 raid markers that we placed at the edges of each of the corners or the prisons around the room. So there's a blue one near me there, yellow left, purple right, and so on. Now these markers indicate 4 positions, and then between them, halfway, are another 4 positions. This leaves, out of 10 players, obviously 8 are covered, so there's just 2 sort of pseudo positions that we've inserted in various positions around the boss. But the goal is effectively to have 8 to 10 static positions that people can just move back to as their default. So I tend to default to the blue or slightly to the left of the blue, and this way, by being in melee range and all players doing the same around the boss, this always ensures that everyone's within heal range of everyone else, everyone's within dispel range, you can always DPS the boss, and this also gives good positional setup for covering the room based on where the rift spawns occur. So, if you have the raid roughly split into sets all around the boss, when a rift spawns near your side, you simply run over there and pick it up. And you don't have to run all the way across the room necessarily to pick up a rift that's near someone else. This rule doesn't always hold true, and generally if you don't have a debuff, you should get a rift even if it's not near you. But overall, by using these default positions, you're just keeping that close distance around the raid while still preparing or being somewhat in range for other mechanics that occur. The other thing to consider for positions, when you're setting this up especially, is how you're going to handle prisons as well as the manifestation ad. So prisons and manifestations work just like they do on normal, so I won't go into too many details about that. You should know how they work. But when you're figuring out your positions, it's important to consider how you're going to handle things like the prison or the manifestation before you assign players. So for example, again, I'm hanging out to the blue or slightly to the left of it most of the time. And the reason for this is that during the prison phase, I'm assigned to the prison that's right by that blue marker. In fact, the lock that's right in melee range is the one I'm assigned to step on. So similarly, we have one of our shamans off to my left in his default position, and he's doing the prison lock that's behind me to the left. So here you can see I'm coming out of another realm and going to my prison spot, basically. So, roughly speaking, figure out your default positions somewhat based on how you handle prisons, and this will just, again, further eliminate the need for extraneous movement that's not necessary. Additionally, you should also try to put most of your ranged DPS players, if possible, on the side that's toward the manifestation, which is the west wall. It will always spawn there, so preferably you want your ranged DPS to be able to engage it immediately rather than running across the boss or across the room. So we try to put most of our ranged on that blue-purple side of the room and let our melee DPS hang out on the other side. And that seems to work pretty well. The second new ability for Heroic is called Banishment. And this ability isn't nearly as difficult to deal with as the Rifts, but it's kind of cool and it's a neat little gimmick. So Banishment is cast on a random raid member about every 1 minute 15 seconds, and this can target anyone except tanks, it seems. So here you can see as a healer I'm being targeted. Once Banishment is cast, that player will be teleported into the corner of the room, and a sort of shadowy corrupted maze will form around them. In addition, this player is instantly and constantly forced to auto-run while they're in this phase. You cannot stop yourself from moving forward, so all you can do is turn your facing and therefore determine which direction you're going to go in. But you cannot stop yourself from moving forward. So if you want to stand still, the best you can do is just to rapidly turn around and around and effectively, not really move any particular direction. You're just kind of going back and forth in the same spot. But generally speaking, it's kind of a cool mechanic to get used to, and using mouse look is the easiest way to deal with it, I think. Anyway, once the player is banished on the outside realm, where the rest of the raid is, a little ad will spawn in that player's location called a corrupted fragment. This is basically the player's physical form and must be destroyed by the raid. When it is killed, the player that was in the banished realm will be teleported out instantly, and they can keep going with the rest of the raid. However, while the corrupted fragment remains active, the player will be running around in this realm. And as you can see, there are a few things to avoid in here. The first thing, and most obvious, is don't touch the walls. If you do so, you'll take heavy damage per second, and you'll gain pride, which is obviously bad. But more importantly, don't let the minions touch you in melee range. If one of those little minions touches you, you'll die instantly. They kind of have this sort of pattern that they'll run in, but because you're teleported in at a random location, or well, I should say a corner, you don't necessarily know which direction the minions will go in when you come in. On the other hand, if you touch one of the golden orbs, which is very Pac-Man-esque, of course, then you will cause the fragment that people are attacking on the outside to take 25% more damage, and this can stack up. So, in essence, the player that's banished, their goal is to remain alive as long as possible while also collecting the orbs that allows the DPS outside to get them out faster. So it's kind of a silly little thing, but it's kind of fun, actually. So let's talk about the banishment patterns and how you dodge them. Here you can see the top-down view of the banishment phase. So the purple is obviously the corruption areas that you cannot touch. All the black is the paths that you're allowed to take, as well as the minions, and you can see the pattern that they're taking. So this animation is about half normal speed that you'd see in game, but this should give you an easier time understanding the pattern, kind of slowed it down a little bit. So the thing to understand is that there are 4 minions on the outside that always rotate around the outer edge counterclockwise, and there are 4 minions on the inside, and never the twain shall meet, as they say. So the outside pattern is obviously very simple. The inside one is the one that you have to pay attention for. So the best way to think about it is that the inside guys repeat a pattern that covers 2 of the circular square areas. So let's watch the pink guy that started at the bottom right of the inside. So he goes all the way along the bottom till he hits the opposite corner. Then he goes up, he goes right, now he's going back down. Now he's going to cross back over and he's going to go up again. And then he's going to go right to the edge and back down. So he stays in his 2 quadrants, and now he'll repeat the process. So there he's going across, all the way across, and then he's going to hug right because he's on the far, outer one of his pattern, basically the left one of his pattern. And then he'll cross back over to go back to his first one, again taking the long route here to get back to his original position. So all 4 of the inner minions repeat this pattern. They're just offset by 1 quadrant, of course, so it covers the entire set. But basically each one covers 2 of these in this sort of almost figure 8 pattern that they do. So now let's talk about player paths, possible player paths, and which ones are good and bad. We'll start with the bad ones. So this first one is just what I would call the straight path. You always spawn in the, let's say, bottom right corner. It's always a corner, but they're all symmetrical, so it doesn't really matter what you call it. So for our instance here, we'll say it's the bottom right there. The yellow marker is the player, obviously. And if you just go straight along this path that you start in, you'll hit the other corner and you'll turn left, and you'll be caught up by the minion that's behind you because all the minions are slightly faster than you are. So there you can see the red guy catches up and you're dead before you can escape this path, essentially. So going straight is a no-go. You cannot do it, and you cannot turn around when you initially spawn because you're trapped by the minion, the red minion that was behind us originally. You can't make it to another escape route. So the first rule is that you always have to take the first left turn. Next is what I would just call left-right. So here you obviously take the left that's required, and then if you go right, oops, you hit orange. So the guy that's coming at you from the right prevents you from taking the immediate right without doing some other movement, which we'll talk about in a moment, because he will touch you basically as you try to get either ahead of him moving to the left immediately, or you just try to go down the path that he's coming at you at. So you cannot do a left-right maneuver either. So if we can't go straight, we can't go left and then immediately right. How about if we go left and then left again? So here you can see what I call left, left, right. You basically just hug the left wall, and then you suddenly, oh god, you hit purple, and it's across from you, or pink rather. So this is another pattern that works, and really we're running out of basic options. There's only so many turns you can do here. But you can see if you do left, left, right, you're going to run into the guy that's coming at you on this final straightaway here, regardless of whether you try to go straight or you go right in front of him, depending slightly on your timing. He's going to catch up with you either way. And you cannot go immediately right after you take this left here, because you would run into the guy that you're sort of chasing, the blue guy in this case. So all three of these patterns are the basic opening possibilities, and none of them work. So what on earth do you do? So now let's talk about the player paths that actually work successfully. And the key here is what I call a stutter step. Now, because a player that's banished is forced to move forward at all times, you cannot actually stop your movement, but you can stutter yourself, which effectively halts your position, and you don't actually move forward in any basic way. The easiest way to do this is to simply turn 180 degrees, so you're going the other direction, and then quickly turn back around, so you're going the previous direction that you were. If you do this rapidly enough, you can effectively stay in the same spot by stuttering back and forth. So all of these successful paths pretty much will involve a stutter step, at least at one time or another. You usually don't have to do it for very long, just once should be enough. But here, as we repeat this pattern, this one, we take our first left because we know we can't go straight. We stutter right here in this gap, waiting for that orange guy that was to our right to pass. And then once he's passed, then we follow him. And then from here, we have a couple options. So in this pattern, we're taking the immediate right, and we're following the red minion who's now ahead of us, and we're following the outside here for the remainder of the duration. You'll be broken out well before this point, even in the pattern, but you have quite a long time to run on the outside after you exit that second exit before the orange guy that comes up behind you will actually hit you. So this is the first successful possible pattern that you can do. The second possible pattern involves two stutters, usually. So it's the same at the start. Take a left, stutter until the guy to your right, the orange one, passes you, then follow him. But this time, as we go to the left, instead of taking that right out to get out and follow the red guy, we take another left. And basically, we continue following the orange guy here. Now, because the red guy on the inside may be catching up, you might have to stutter as he passes in front of you. But you know, because of the pattern, that he will go in front of you. He will not take a right and cut you off. So you just make sure you stutter there when that red guy is coming from your left near the end of the path. So here we'll go through it again. So we take a left, stutter, wait for the guy on the right to pass, and then follow Mr. Orange there. And we just keep following Mr. Orange, hugging the left wall on the inside. And around here, we have to watch where the red guy is on the inside of the left. If he's approaching us, we have to stutter. And once he passes, then you can follow him. And by then, you'll be broken out, probably well before this point anyway. But you can just follow the red guy for a while now until things are over. So that's another possible pattern for success. So the final good pattern is my personal favorite because it's so easily repeatable. And this is left, left, stutter, and then right. So here you can see we hug left. We're following the blue guy here, but we cannot go straight. So we have to stutter here so that the guy in front of us, the purple or pink guy, can pass safely in front. And then we follow him. And this is the easy part. So you just follow this guy for quite a long time, basically duplicating his pattern, going straight across. And here we're going to repeat it. So here we're going to stutter again so that the guy that's coming up in front of us, just like we did before, passes in front and takes his left turn, and then we follow him around. And you just can keep repeating this process over and over as long as you need to, with proper stutter in there when necessary, so that the guy coming at you doesn't actually threaten you. And you should be well broken out by the time you even do this more than once, so it should not be a big deal at all. But here you can see, going through it just one more time just to clarify. Go down the straight, you take 2 lefts, stutter here in the corner until the guy in front passes and takes his left turn, then you follow pink. And you just keep going around following pink until you get to the next far corner, and you stutter once again, and keep doing that. So, that should give you plenty of options and methods for handling the banishment phase. Now, we should talk about Mark of Arrogance dispels as well. The main issue here is that, as mentioned in the raid composition section, healing requirements are very low in this fight overall. But dispels actually become quite problematic with the requirements of constant movement for most raid members and general positioning around this very large room. Simply put, there are situations when your 2 healers, if you're using 2 healers, may be out of range of someone that has the Mark of Arrogance dot on them, and that particular healer is the one that currently has Gift of the Titans active. In addition, because of the timing of Gift of the Titans application and the dot applications as well, sometimes you get in this offset situation where a Gift of the Titans runs out just before a new set of dots are applied, and then you have to wait until the new gift is applied in order for that new healer that gets the gift to dispel. And in certain situations, generally this seems to happen around the time of prison or around when the manifestation spawns afterward. You can find yourself behind on dispels, especially if there's any delay because of range issues or whatnot. Even a couple seconds will make it quite painful. So for the most part, that's really the goal of healing in this fight, is managing those dispels. Because of that, if you have trouble with dispelling, there are 2 ways to deal with it. One, as mentioned in the raid comp, is to use 3 healers, and then you'll have just more opportunity for active dispels. Even when you don't have Gift of the Titans, you spread out that pride gain. The other option is to simply not worry about the pride gain if you don't have Gift and you have to dispel emergency situations. And I would recommend the second. Use 2 healers, and as long as you don't push yourself above 75 pride before the 30% phase as a healer, then you can easily deal with the other lower pride mechanics just like any other player would. So at 25, obviously, up to 25 to 49, it's bursting pride, and then below 75, it's projection. Those are quite easy to deal with as a healer, just like anyone else. So my recommendation is try to manage dispelling the dot as much as you can with Gift exclusively. But if you get behind, you see 3 players with the dot, for example, don't be afraid to have one of your healers just dispel without the debuff or without Gift. It's not going to be a huge amount of pride gain over simply, performing better and dodging bolts or something like that regular in the fight. So finally, I want to talk a bit about manifestation management. And as mentioned before, mechanically, manifestations work just like they do in normal. So they'll spawn one at a time on the west wall of the room. And you interrupt their bolt, and you stun them, and you kill them quickly, all that good stuff. When they die, of course, they will give 5 pride to the 2 nearest players. Now, the reason I bring this up is because there are a number of guides or just general information out there that often suggests on Heroic that managing that extra pride when the manifestation dies is of the utmost importance. And frankly, I could not disagree more. The fact of the matter is that the effort that is required in many cases to have the players with Gift of the Titans be the closest players to the manifestation when it dies, to relieve that extra 5 pride or 10 pride throughout the raid basically, is not worth it in the grand scheme of the fight. The only way that this will become a detriment to the raid as a whole is if it would cause a player to reach 75 plus before you transition the boss to the 30% phase. And the likelihood of that is extremely low if you're, at all able to get to this boss basically in heroic progression, meaning you have enough DPS and healing and gear and all that stuff. So, especially if you're using 2 healers, this does not seem very useful. The main reason for that is that since Gift of the Titans is cast on a healer and then 2 random DPS, especially if it's on melee DPS, those players have to lose a lot of DPS time on the boss, or just a lot of position issues away from where they normally would stand to get to that position to be closest to the manifestation. Because it spawns so far away, unless you have a way to death grip it, or otherwise interrupt it and move it before you kill it, you're going to have to position players away from the boss frequently to get in range of that manifestation. Even if the ranged players, ranged DPS are the 2 with Gift of the Titans, besides the healer, they still have to move slightly to be closest. And again, the amount of effort required and consideration in such a chaotic fight, as well as the positioning requirement, does not seem worth it. So, if you find that this pride is not getting you near that 75 threshold before 30%, do not worry about messing around with it. There are plenty of other things you can do, just dodging normal bolts and add spawn pride and all that stuff to mitigate your gains throughout the fight. So that should cover everything, really. Like I said, everything else is mechanically the same as it is on normal, so as long as you handle those mechanics properly, you should be fine. You'll notice, for example, that for the reflection ads that spawn, we chose to stack in the middle under the boss when those are coming up. And the reason for this is that you cannot stay stacked due to the bolts from the rifts that come out frequently, so we decided to, since we're all kind of around the boss in a circle anyway, to stack up in the center, and that seemed to work really well for gathering those reflections up. You could also just force them to spawn at your location and not really gather them. And if you have some way to AE taunt on your tanks or just get them on your tanks, that'll work fine too. But anyway, that's pretty much it. So once you reach 30% and your pride is reset, then it becomes just like the normal. You've got a burn period of 60 seconds before the regular mechanics start once again, swelling pride and stuff. And on heroic, since the boss has more health, you just have to focus on killing him basically before everyone's pride gets too high. For healers, we just dispelled like crazy because you don't get gift anymore, obviously. So just dispel and deal with the extra pride as best you can. And eventually people will get converted. But basically when they're at 100%, they do a bunch more damage. And as long as swelling pride doesn't hit them once again, they'll be able to kill the boss pretty quickly at that point. So that is the heroic raid guide for Shaw of Pride. As always, good luck, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed, please subscribe.